Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Avatar video. In this one, I'm going to go through the newly released for Kickstarter backers An Urgent Request adventure for the Avatar Legends role-playing game. So we've been waiting for this for a while. For anyone wondering, this is the adventure that they did in the All-Star Play, which is up on the official YouTube channel, where they had some of the voice actors and some other kind of celebrities play Avatar Legends, and they obviously exclusively gave it to backers for a while, and I think it's now been publicly released. So we have been waiting to see what the details are of this. They teased us with obviously the image of Zeisan that you can see on screen here, and a few other things, but now we do finally have it. It was, what was it, like last night into this morning, I think, was when they actually sent this out, and here I have it to kind of go through. Again, as ever, from a lore perspective, because I'm not super into the game, so I won't be going too much into any of that side of things. But we do want to talk about the fact that we do have the full Legends NPC kind of description for Princess Zeisan. And then we, of course, have the story set up for the An Urgent Request adventure itself, which I always take as being like, at the very least, the setup, the characters included in this are canon. What's questionable canon and what probably is not worth kind of thinking about too much is obviously the player characters just have to be considered as being, I guess, a group of heroes in the lore. And then there is weirdness about the fact that they're technically, it means there's no canonical or concrete ending to a lot of these events. Outside of the fact that, like, in most of the cases, like, if a risk is to one of the Legend NPC characters, they're not going to, like, die here. So going over all of this, especially like this one, is of course the idea that we know something is going to happen to Princess Zeisan, given that she's Sozan's sister and all this other stuff around her and what's going on in the Roku era. A bunch of this stuff has to get moved out of the way by Sozan. He has to ultimately come out of this situation victorious. And so we wonder, when and where is that going to happen? It's obviously not going to be in an adventure, but does this one actually add that much more onto it? That's probably the real question that we get here. My ultimate thoughts, just before we get into it, are that this definitely expands on a couple of the elements presented in the core book in terms of the Roku lore section, but really doesn't give you that much like new information. Yes, there's one or two new characters involved here. They technically advance the plot because we're getting closer to Zeisan and Khandro's wedding, but we're not there yet. So this is like a event about to happen just prior to that, but it's not the wedding itself. Now, the wedding, of course, in my opinion, needs to be told in an actual kind of story medium. I don't think there's I wouldn't like it, I think, if they told the wedding, if it is going to be a really big event that actually is kind of important story content. I don't want it to be like an adventure that needs to be delivered in a story medium. Now, whether that is the novels or what, we don't actually know. But I think people are interested enough in the Zeisan content that they want to know what the story is about. Well, this is her goal. Why did she fail, basically? How did this go down? How tragic is this? Because it's the implication from a lot of what we know about Zeisan and like Ryoshan and stuff like that is that things go bad. So that's pretty interesting. So yeah, let's get straight into it. We'll start with Zeisan's Legend NPC profile, and then we'll go through the actual An Urgent Request setup information. So I'll actually open this up, because I won't be just showing you the whole thing, just because like the PDF is meant to be like exclusive to backers at the moment, so I don't really know what the whole situation is with regards to like copyright and how much I should be showing. I'll show you guys the full NPC thing here because it's like 2 pages out of the book. Otherwise, I think I'll just be showing 1 or 2 other pages from the event, the request, or An Urgent Request itself. So here we go. Legend NPC, Princess Zeisan, or the way they pronounced it in the All-Star video was Zeisan, almost as if the S and Z were like reversed. So I don't know what the pronunciation necessarily is. Zeisan, Zeisan. I'll probably just be alternating between the two because I don't know exactly what it's meant to be. But Zeisan is what I've been going with for a while now, because Fire Nation names, when they have a Z, it's very clearly, typically the Z is a Z, you know, that sort of thing. So interestingly here, we do get a quote from her, which is obviously, like, we haven't had actual story material with the character, so we don't know any specific thing that she said as such. Without air, fire suffocates. Under a gale, fire is snuffed. Balance builds the hottest flames. So that's a very interesting one. Kind of words of wisdom here, but very air and fire focused, which is obviously what the character of Zeisan actually is. She also wants balance, and it's the whole idea of, like, yeah, you need air, but like, no air, bad. Too much air, also bad. But you need enough to actually do firebending. It's an interesting point just with regards to that kind of, the way those kind of two elements interact with each other. So quite interesting stuff. Drive of the character, of course, is to overthrow the reign of her brother, the Fire Lord Sozin, and restore the Fire Nation's ruling family to balance. So, as we know from the core book, she's a character who has basically figured out that she is effectively kind of part of this line of Fire Lords. Royalty at the moment is not doing particularly good things, and she thinks it's just going to go from worse to worse, which is obviously what ends up happening until Zuko and, of course, the events of ATLA actually happen. But it's interesting that she has kind of become enlightened to the issues with her family. And now, this is obviously quite interesting, because this is the Roku era, again, is set before any of the Sozin Roku arguments happen. So Roku has no reason to particularly suspect Sozin of doing anything wrong. Now, admittedly, he's out dealing with other stuff around the world, being the Avatar, so he's not around in the Fire Nation at this point. So it makes sense that his sister, who's quite close to him and sees a lot of the behind closed doors type stuff, would be a little bit more aware about, like, his actual ambitions and so on. But anyway, let's go through this. Zeisan is the sister of Fire Lord Sozin, second in line to the throne, but born without firebending. So we know this already. This is just nice to have a pretty concrete, like, most of what we know about Zeisan laid out in one section, rather than having to grab, like, oh, they talk about Zeisan in, like, these three separate sections in the previous kind of lore stuff in the core book. Her teachers and parents pitted her against Sozin throughout their childhood. The competitions were meant to drive Sozin to even greater heights and draw firebending abilities out of Zeisan. When the struggles between the two failed to transform Zeisan into a firebender, her teachers turned their focus entirely upon Sozin. But Zeisan refused to stop competing, studying, and growing, and striving to prove herself worthy of her family legacy, until she realized, while studying air nomad philosophies, that maybe her family legacy wasn't worthy of her. When Sister Ryoushan came to the Fire Nation capital as a teacher, Zeisan devoted herself to air nomad training, thinking she might gain new skills that would make her a match for Sozin. Zeisan connected with air nomad philosophies and techniques in a way no one could have foreseen. She learned air nomad styles of motion and action, and Ryoushan even gifted Zeisan with the secrets of chi blocking. So basically all of this that is stuff that we knew before. They emphasized the two being, like, pitted against each other, which is why Zeisan does have this kind of little bit of an edge to her, where, like, she is making some big political moves. She's not afraid to do that, even though you would, consider her to be, a hero, a kind of positive character. She still does have some elements, like, from her family of this era of, like, doing a little bit of what needs to be done to make changes type stuff going on, but obviously not leaning so far down the road that is effectively another kind of Sozin type situation. So they just emphasize, I think, the competition between the two a little bit more, that, it was an issue that she wasn't a firebender, and they tried to see and push her to, if there was firebending, it would have been found, but it obviously wasn't, and that's a whole thing here. Zeisan didn't just connect with Ernomad teachings, however, she connected with Ryoshan herself. The two of them fell in love just as Zeisan's views of the world were shifting, but they have never felt free to express their love to each other. While their hearts sang in each other's presence, Zeisan had grown to see her family and their legacy as a blight upon the world. She couldn't leave her whole life behind to be with Ryoshan, not when she believed that she was the best chance to fix the Fire Nation, so she did her best to hide her feelings. Instead of running away from her responsibilities, Zeisan decided to find a way to dismantle her family's legacy of corruption. She eventually connected with the Guiding Wind, the new movement of air nomads with an anti-nobility beliefs and an active presence in the world. Zeisan eventually proposed a political marriage with monk Kondro, the leader of the Guiding Wind. It was an alliance that would grant the Guiding Wind a strong foothold in the Fire Nation while giving Zeisan useful allies in her home territory. Neither Zeisan nor Kondro bear love towards each other, but both see the marriage as well worth the sacrifice. Through it all, Zeisan has demonstrated her indomitable will and desire to better the world by taking on the corrupt and vile, even if it means sacrificing her own personal happiness and the possible relationship with Ryoshan. So all that stuff towards the end is covered in the core book. So you would say in this, relatively little. We get the quote, which is actually quite nice, and maybe a little bit more about the kind of growing up a non-bender competition against Zeisan, even though it was referenced a little bit in the core book. So there is that. There's her kind of like track if you do want to know some of the kind of more details about her in the game. Just if you're wondering about that. How to play Zeisan. Everything Zeisan does serves her goal of overthrowing Zeisan and eliminating the legacy of corruption she sees in the Fire Nation ruling family. Makes sense. She is willing to sacrifice, and she'll ask for the same. So that makes sense. She believes she's lost her chance at a happy life with Ryoshan, but every now and then her drive will abate and she'll take a moment to pause, reflect, and lament what she has lost. Her techniques, if you do wonder what the details are there. Chi blocking jab, switch it up, and squall style strike. Let's see, fling yourself into a nearby wall or structure and then launch off it with all the force of your body aimed down with your arms to strike directly at your enemy's nerve point. Okay, so I think that's like a Tai Li move. I think we've seen her do something like that before, where she just uses agility and almost like mid-air kind of like reaches down and goes for the kind of like chi block move. So it's interesting that she has that too. Obviously getting across, she's extremely agile because she has to make up for the fact that she doesn't have firebending. Because they're almost implying that, like, you know, she's obviously a skilled fighter. Does it end up being a confrontation against Zeisan at the end of her story that happens? Who knows? So Zeisan is a teacher, active and driven, constantly pushing towards her goals. She'll only make time to teach a student if she feels truly indebted, or if it serves those very goals. Let's see, Zeisan. Yeah, of course, the whole against nobility kind of aspect is going to be important if you do want to interact with her. With all that said, she will always look back fondly upon her time learning from Ryoshan for how it helped her find herself and her beliefs, and how she fell in love with Ryoshan while learning from the Air Nomad. It was one of the happiest times in Zeisan's life, and she might choose to teach a student who reminds her of Ryoshan or herself, so that's interesting. Her heart truly belongs to Ryoshan, even if she never said it so out loud. But she can find comfort, happiness, and relief in training another person and forming a meaningful bond with them. So that makes sense. Where to find her? Of course, Fire Nation Capital, Harry Bulkan. That just makes complete sense. Nothing else to particularly kind of talk about there. Just while we're here, we should probably go through this. They do give you these pre-generated characters, which feel like, I suppose, a little bit more important here because these were the characters that, Dante Basco and everyone used as part of the All-Star actual play. But my understanding is that I don't think these characters are meant to be canon just because they're presenting the adventure as something like you can play, and all of the adventures do have like a pre-generated set of characters. It's just that art was done for these characters because they wanted the visuals for the All-Star actual play. But, you know, we have Nyanchi here, We have Ezra, the hammer, of course. We have Boyne or Boyne, not sure about the pronunciation there. And we also have ZB. And look, there's some interesting stuff in the descriptions of these characters. You know, when she was young, she had a close relationship with Princess Zeisan. So, like, I don't know if you want to consider these characters canon, that like it was actually these specific individuals that kind of did what happened. But again, this is where we get into the adventure and the whole idea of, well, is the way they did it in the All-Star play canonical or what? Because I don't really think that is actually the case. So that's that whole thing. I'm pretty sure it's just like all the other adventures, just meant to be a group of heroes kind of resolved this issue. So if we go up through this, you can see where we begin, an urgent request. So we'll get into the kind of setup for the story here. I'll probably get the PDF off the screen in a little bit as we go through some of this. But the basic idea is, of course, it's Roku era. Fire Nation Princess Zeisan is engaged to the leader of the Guiding Wind, an air nomad named Kondro, and their wedding is nigh. News of the celebration is all over the nation's capital as part of the festivities leading up to the wedding. The princess is giving a lecture on the Guiding Wind's principles for all to hear in Haribulkan, in the Fire Nation capital, of course. Firelord Zeisan believes his sister is out to dethrone him, and in a move to discredit her, is planning to interrupt the lecture with undercover Fire Nation soldiers pretending to be radical air nomads. Air nomad sister Ryoshan has discovered the plot to ruin the lecture and asked the heroes to warn Zeisan before it is too late. So there is the core setup, and I'll get this out of the way for now, because there's going to be a lot of kind of moving around throughout this, and they talk about, you know, like how to play the game, how to use this if you're actually planning to play through this, of course. They talk about, you know, these characters are the ones from the actual play, but you can use your own characters, as is ever the case. And so, yeah, the story setup here is that your heroes are basically effectively working for Ryoshan to protect Princess Zeisan. The idea, of course, is that Ryoshan and Zeisan are trying to hide basically their kind of feelings from each other. They don't want other people to know, because I think, you know, the idea is that if Sozin found out, that's something he has in his back pocket to have an advantage over his sister, of course, if he found out about the extent of their feelings for each other. So they kind of stay away from each other, even though they're actually within the same vicinity. So Ryoshan can't be seen to act on her own to particularly help Zeisan here. So she gets the player characters to help Zeisan instead of her. And I think the setup here is basically the idea is that the player characters slash Ryoshan are the ones who find out about this plot, which is being concocted by Minister Zianda, who is very loyal to Sozin, of course. And so Zianda is actually the one kind of running this operation. Sozin is involved because he's approved this in the background, but it's Zianda and some of these other characters who are actually the ones in like particular focus. So again, it's what they typically do with the kind of actual main characters in these events, which is that you don't interact with them like a massive amount. So like Sozin wouldn't particularly be involved in this story. Maybe you can include some stuff with him at the end. Ryoshan, I guess you get sort of like beginning and end kind of interactions with her. And then Zeisan, the idea is that you build up to your player characters meeting her, informing her about the plot, or do you miss that opportunity and have to intervene at the lecture as it's actually happening? And that's kind of what they kind of tease a little bit as they go through kind of potential possibilities here. It's like you warn her ahead of time and she goes ahead, but is more cautious. You warn her ahead of time, she calls it off. You don't get there in time, things go bad. You know, there's those different options for kind of what's actually going to happen here. So yeah, that's basically what we have here. We of course have the idea that, you know, this is all the Fire Nation political stuff. Sozin doesn't like the air nomad influence on the Fire Nation and so wants it gone. And so especially because the Guiding Wind is a little bit more kind of like extreme than even just the more popular air nomad kind of you know, popularity within the Fire Nation. There's a particular focus against the Guiding Wind. Now, this ultimately is going to relate to the idea that the plan kind of what was teased in the core book, which is that it seems like Sozin is orchestrating Fire Nation people that are loyal to him to dress up effectively as Guiding Wind members and basically commit crimes to make the Guiding Wind look bad. And effectively that is the plan here. Minister Zianda is going to get one of the other characters, which we'll get to later, that character, her officers basically, to dress up and in the middle of the lecture act as Guiding Wind members and kind of basically discredit everything that Zeisan is saying, and that should, you know, make a big difference, of course. But what else do we have going on here? So yeah, Sister Ryoshan uncovers what is happening, asks the player characters to warn the princess of the plot, as she's unable to do so herself for personal reasons, as I've just discussed. As they make their way to the symposium, they are stopped by Tiger Monkey, a spy sent to investigate the air nomads by the nobility, who suspect the player characters of working against the Fire Nation. So there's another kind of cog issue in the way here. Tiger Monkey, a spy character, of course. They have a section here where they emphasize the kind of brother and sister dynamic, and we've seen a lot of this kind of before. Zeisan, you know, being kind of a bit concerned that, you know, Sozin and all of his insecurities will eventually force him down a darker path, and she's trying to disrupt it in a way to stop, obviously, him doing anything bad, but also I suppose there might be a slight sense of trying to save him and like direct him away from this course that he seems to be heading down. That, you know, if he does get, you know, politically defeated here, it could stop a lot of what kind of ends up happening. If she gains control, that would be a very different kind of future, if that was what actually happened, but we know it doesn't play out that way. So it's interesting that we just know the whole idea as we head forward. So yeah, a disruptive faction of Air Nomads. She believes that if more Fire Nation followed the Air Nomad teachings, they would turn away from Firelord Sozin and his xenophobic fear-mongering. So, yeah, Sozin is aware that his sister is trying to undermine him, and so he wants to thwart her by discrediting her and her Air Nomad teachings. And yeah, their current conflict started with arguments and accusations as Sozin interrogated Zeisan's beliefs, but it has now escalated to the Firelord spreading propaganda around the city concerning the Guiding Wind's radical ideas. Worried Fire Nation nobles who bought into Sozin's propaganda machine have asked an independent investigator, Tiger Monkey, to find out what the air nomads in the city are up to and to bring them evidence of what's going on. Because that's the whole idea. There is the difference between it is the nobles are into this very like basic version of air nomad philosophy, whereas the Guiding Wind version is that you basically give up being a noble and do the full like give up worldly possessions, which Zeisan is willing to do. It should be noted that Ryoshan in all of this is kind of okay with the Guiding Wind, but is not part of the Guiding Wind herself. So she is here basically acting as the more kind of basic, almost like fad kind of like teacher for the Air Nomad teachings in the Fire Nation. Because again, there is that kind of center that's also being built that was presented in the original lore in the core book as well. So there is a lot going on here. Now, ultimately, a lot of these ideas are similar and basically identical to what we got in the core book. There's not too much else being talked about here, but it does seem like it's just the very next stage on from what was presented in that book. So, yeah. They then tease Ryoshan and the idea that, you know, she might have a chance to see the princess, if only from afar. And she's trying to convince herself that she's not here just to basically see Zeisan. So that is interesting. They did highlight as well that she's here basically because the Fire Nation nobility want her here. So she is being kept under watch, which I think is very, very interesting because Sozin doesn't quite trust her. And it's interesting because it says here, Sozin knows that Ryoshan was one of Zeisan's most beloved teachers, but he has only learned hints of the depth of their relationship. yeah, we get the idea of their relationship together. Roshan wouldn't get in the way of the arranged marriage because they've both basically agreed that their relationship kind of won't happen and that it would be a bigger thing for the world to see the effect that this political marriage actually does have. But you could see that it seems like Sozin is growing closer and closer to finding out just how close Roshan and Zeisan actually were. And that feels like an instigating event for like a novel or a book or something like that. And I think that could be an incredible story to see how this all goes down. For sure. But yeah, still nothing super new just yet. So yeah, they talk here about, in the past week, several air nomads have complained about having their clothes stolen, whether straight from a drying line or after an attack by masked assailants in the city alleys. So yeah, this is the idea that, again, the Sozin loyalists are going to dress up as Guiding Wind. That's why they've been stealing air nomad clothing around the place so they can, go ahead with their plan. So that's that whole idea. And yeah, then we have the symposium itself, all these activities. That's just more on the setup going through this. The spy Tiger Monkey, capable spy and firebender. He operates freely, taking work from those who can pay, and from those he deems worthy. He's currently working on behalf of Fire Nation nobility to get a better read on the situation with the air nomads. So yeah, that's what's going on with Tiger Monkey, and obviously he could be a theoretical fight that happens in the story as well. And yeah, the whole idea is just the celebrations all across the city in the build-up to a royal wedding. So they're just highlighting that it's going to be busy, a lot of people around the place. It could be tricky to travel around the busy Fire Nation. So just the player characters getting to Zeisan is going to be a bit of a challenge. That's the whole premise of the story. They can't just walk over here and meet with Zeisan because she's the princess, of course. It has to be a little bit secretive, of course. So there's that whole idea as well. And then because Roshan knows but Zeisan doesn't know, why would Zeisan believe whatever these player characters are saying to her? Because they don't know each other. So there's interesting stuff like that. They give theoretical ideas for like escalations of what could happen. Tiger Monkey confronting the actual people who are going to mess up the lecture, and so on. So interesting stuff here, but we'll move on. They get to the whole idea of like, okay, how does it end? And they say, again, the couple of ideas that they present are: the heroes make it to Zeisan before the symposium and warn her of the attack. With Roshan's backing, she believes them, but chooses to go forward with the symposium anyway to catch the conspirators in the act. When they attack, she's prepared to out them for who they really are. This exposes Ministers Yanda and Mio as perpetrators and turns the Fire Nation nobles towards Zeisan's favor. The heroes can't make it to Princess Zeisan before the symposium, but arrive in time to be there when the firebenders attack. In this case, they defend her, but they come across as also potentially being attackers, so they have to prove themselves. And even though they fend off the attack, there's enough chaos to give the firebenders and Zyanda a chance to flee before getting caught. So that's a bit of a kind of like half and half ending. They don't make it in time, and the firebenders attack, and the whole thing goes off as planned. They're unprepared for it. The effect is catastrophic. Tiger Monkey captures and interrogates some of the firebenders for his own investigation. The firebenders continue to pretend the Guiding Wind to be Guiding Wind radicals, and Tiger Monkey's report ultimately leads the nobles to believing the Guiding Wind is responsible for the attack. And then the other option is that they convince her to cancel the symposium, which again just opens the door for Sozin's propaganda to be more widely spread. So you kind of wonder, like, which is the canonical way that this event actually happens. We assume nothing so crazy happens that potentially, like, because if something bad happens here, you have to assume that might push the wedding back, which I don't think is necessarily going to be something that actually happens. So I get the impression that this is probably one of the ones where maybe one of the more positive outcomes is meant to happen. it could be an interesting one where like maybe it is that kind of middle option where it's sort of like half and half, where the attack begins to happen but it gets kind of sorted out. I don't really know, but like there's some interesting ideas ultimately. The rest of this is kind of going over like the setup for what the exact details are. I'll actually put it back on screen here as we go through the important characters and groups. So we of course have Princess Zeisan herself. Again, the symposium is the whole idea of, again, trying to convince the nobles to kind of give up their nobility. And if she can convince enough nobles, that ruins basically people who are the most supportive of Sozin, and she shifts a lot of the political stuff in her favor. And yeah, she's aware of what's going on. She isn't aware of Minister Zianda's plans, of course, so that's a whole situation here. Here's a list of the key characters. So Zeisan, Ryoushan, Minister Zianda, Mio, who is the Firelord Sozin's bodyguard and the person in charge of the firebenders who will pretend to be air nomads to discredit the princess. Mio's firebenders, Tiger Monkey, and Khandra. So that makes a lot of sense. Ryoushan, I suppose let's go through her kind of major NPC bio here. Air Nomad who is in the Fire Nation on personal business. She's not a member of the Guiding Wind, but is sympathetic to their philosophy. In particular, she appreciates the Guiding Wind turning away from politics and noble society, even as she feels forced to engage with that society by her birth and by the wrongdoing she sees in her own family. She sees the conflicts between the Guiding Wind and wider Air Nomad society, but to her, the core beliefs is true. So, she has a very middle-of-the-road kind of view on this. Sister Ryoushan trained Zeisan, taught her how to chi block. The two fell in love. Ryoushan honored Zeisan's goals by hiding her own feelings. She understands them. I would never do anything to disrupt her love's plans to overthrow the Fire Lord. She's been invited to the Fire Nation capital by nobles to teach their children air nomad ways. This is a direct result of Zeisan's influence, and Ryoushan knows it. If something happens to the princess's symposium to discredit her and the air nomad, she is likely to lose her own influence over the Fire Nation nobles who currently look to her for guidance. So, makes complete sense, I think, what's going on there with this character. Again, you sort of feel like with both Zeisan and Ryoushan, they need an actual story content piece on them to get across this dynamic a little bit better, and just get across like what is the big incident that happens that means that, like, this obviously doesn't happen. This just doesn't work out for these characters. What exactly happens? So who is Minister Zianda? Is Firelord Sozin's right hand and expert firebender. He has been charged with discrediting Princess Zeisan and the Guiding Wind. Okay. The minister was minister under Firelord Sozin's father and has been an advisor to the Firelord for many years. Okay, so that's pretty nice. He is loyal to a fault to the throne and blindly follows whatever the Firelord wants. He would do and has done anything for the Firelord, up to and including crimes that would get other nobles arrested. He's recognizable for his jewelry, complex hairstyle, and fine robes. He rarely leaves Harry Vulcan except on important business. The player characters first spot him in the lower levels of the Fire Nation capital, where he's incognito and not wearing his adornment, but he is still recognizable. Okay, makes sense. Mio is Firelord Sozin's personal bodyguard, so that's an interesting one. Normally Mio wears a mask that covers her entire face and is not seen without it. This means that when she takes it off, she's basically invisible because no one knows what she looks like. So she's a perfect candidate to lead this group of firebenders. And again, the idea is she's loyal to Sozin. She's working kind of for the minister here, but her loyalty is not to him as such. So you almost get the idea here is that if this goes wrong, she would hide the fact that this ultimately leads back to Sozin and kind of throws Zianda under the bus, I guess, is the idea there. Mio's firebenders, of course, are just kind of generic firebenders, but, they're loyal to Sozin and included in things in that way. Tiger Monkey. So, yeah, expert firebender, independent spy, working for Fire Nation nobles. And that is interesting. Like, it is separate. Like, he is not associated as such with Sozin. So let's go through this one. Has some nobles nervous and interested in getting the truth outside of the propaganda. Okay, so that's good. When Zeisan announced her marriage to Khandra, A coalition of such nobles hired Tiger Monkey to investigate the guiding wind. He's been following members, keeping tabs on what they do and who they interact with. When sisters Ryoshan entered the city, she and her own associates, the heroes, became subjects of interest. The nobles know that Zeisan trained with Ryoshan, and they encourage Tiger Monkey to look in on her and learn more about her and her relationship with the guiding wind. He didn't constantly do it, and he saw Ryoshan's circumspect behavior. In reality, a response to being monitored by those soldiers, as evidence that she was up to something. After her known associates, the player characters begin rushing through Harry Bulkan. He becomes worried that there's a plot against the princess or the Fire Lord. So, that's an interesting one in that he's someone who seems to get half of the story and is going to be like after your player characters, thinking they're the problems, when actually it's like the other characters who are the true problems in all of this. And then, yeah, we know about Chondro. He doesn't seem to be a major player in this, like, as such at the moment. But he is the leader of the Guiding Wind, so that is important. He hopes to disrupt the current regimes across the world and bring balance back to the Four Nations as he sees it. So, yeah, he is proposing sort of a more active air nomads, whereas he views them as being a little bit complacent and now leaning into the kind of popularity of their kind of culture among other nations. And that's not good if the people kind of adopting their culture don't go all in like Zeisan has and that sort of thing. You have to, you know, actually commit to it fully. He's agreed to marry Zeisan, of course, for the political goals. He'll get to Symposium area before it starts. He's the first person that they'll meet there. He stands as an intermediary between the player characters and the princess. He can help them with a myriad of things. Okay, so that's pretty interesting. I think Chondro could be super interesting as a character if we get proper story content that like fleshes this character out. Because like I actually would really like to get some maybe like backstory that like addresses him confronting like leaders of the different temples and stuff like that, getting across like this is my view, this is why I disagree with you, like was roughly alluded to in the core book, where we had like one of the leaders, I think it was of the Southern Temple, I think it was, and they highlighted that character as being a bit of an opposition to Chondro ultimately. Important locations. It's Fire Nation capital, it's Harry Bulkan. There's nothing super important here. Ryoshan's apartment where she's staying, of course, Harry Bulkan Square, open air market, Unzai's tea house is interesting. This is where Minister Zyanda meets with Mio to hash out their plans. And obviously this means that this is someone who is loyal to the minister and thus Sozen, I guess. City streets, and that's pretty much that. Is there anything else? Adventure hook. Let's just read this one out. The heroes helped accompany Sister Ryoshan to the city, but they meet her for the first time during play when she approaches the heroes after they saw Zyanda and the exchange at the tea house. She charges them to warn Zeisan, and she can help figure out the conspiracy behind the scroll if the player characters have it, or she can suggest that they might want to nab the scroll to figure out what is going on. Sister Ryoshan vouches for them and protects them from any blowback from their antics in trying to retrieve the scroll as best she can, but she can't save them from anything. At best, she's a visiting dignitary. Okay, so there's a couple more details that I probably should mention that I might have skimmed past here. They cover the idea of there being a fan. Like, this is basically this item that Ryoshan gives to the player characters as basically, this will be something that you can show to Zeisan that is proof that you are basically working for me, Ryoshan. So it's a small fan from her time with Zeisan that proves the connection to Ryoshan. That's the whole idea here. That's mentioned a couple of times there. So that's an interesting kind of thing. I wonder, is there a specific story about that? That seems kind of interesting. And yeah, the scroll is basically just what Minister Zyanda gives to Mio, which is the plan for the actual, like, what they're going to do at the symposium. effectively. So look, I think it's a cool setup for a story. Again, these adventures are always weird to judge and stuff like that, but I think you're getting a reasonably fleshed out kind of group of characters here. That, like, here's a notable minister under Sozin, finding out that Sozin has a personal bodyguard, and it's this kind of mask wearing kind of female character named Mio, and she leads a bunch of other kind of like firebenders. Is kind of interesting in my opinion. So that's kind of cool. And just a few little details here, like if I open this up again, you could see like in the actual gameplay stuff for like Mio, fire whip, flame knives. That's like a bit of a different kind of style of firebending overall, whereas, you know, Tiger Monkey has flame knives but fire stream instead. So that's that. That's kind of interesting. Minister Zianda has Breath of Fire, so that's interesting. So expert firebender, that's interesting to note. But yeah, not too much kind of else there to particularly talk about. And I think that more or less kind of brings this to an end. I think it's very on par with some of the other adventures. Would I say it's the best of the bunch? Probably not. I still think, say, like the Korra one with Varric feels like one of the more important ones because it has actual backstory for Varric in it. There's some interesting ideas in some of the other ones. You kind of wonder, like, is this one good because it's just very, very, very similar to the lore from the core book, which was the best stuff, new stuff in the core book? Because, like, obviously it doesn't expand things that much and is effectively just an adventure that directly focuses on this, because like the Roku adventure in the actual that we have previously is kind of almost like unrelated to Zeisan. So this one is just more of a kind of like, okay, yeah, this is about more of what we'd expect. But yeah, the main takeaway here has to be that yeah, we need story content involving Zeisan, and it's again an open plot thread that I really want to know what happens. And I just worry that they use the legend stuff to tell it and the story gets told in a really weird way. I ultimately don't think they'll do it. I think they will come around to doing this because I do suspect that after Yang Chen Book 2, Legacy of Yang Chen, that the novels will change over to being Roku focused. Now, the challenge there is going to be, if they do Roku, okay, you now have the era set up. This is the era that they seem to be going for. And I think it makes complete sense if you do a Roku novel to, like the Legends RPG does, set it before Sozin and Roku have their issues. That way you can focus on what Roku does as the Avatar prior to that big challenge kind of that he faces in his career. But also, you in the background could highlight that this is what's happening at the capital, that Roku's maybe being distracted doing Avatar stuff, which keeps him away from this stuff that's going on, and maybe he comes super close to finding out about it but misses out kind of last minute. And I don't know, you could do a very interesting kind of political behind doors scheming style book where Sozin is always trying to keep Roku out of his way and busy while he enacts this plan to get rid of Zeisan, and the whole dynamic with Ryoshan begins to come out. And if I think that's a reveal that probably has to happen in the story, is that he finds out about Ryoshan and Zeisan's relationship. If it relates to like her still being in the Fire Nation, he could have her captured at some point, and that way he can control Zeisan. That might challenge the wedding going ahead, which is another kind of interesting aspect. And you wonder what goes down in all of this. Like, is it just that he somehow engineers a situation where the guiding wind are seen to be the ones who quote unquote kill Zeisan? That way Sozin's hatred towards the airbenders as we go forward is a bit more justified. It's a kind of tough one though. Like if you have something like that happen, that would feel like a much bigger event that like Roku would have had to deal with. So I wonder what exactly happens here, like overall. And that's the main thing. There's so much potential in the storytelling here. I want the story done well when we finally get to it, and you kind of wonder, is this going to be told? But anyway, So yeah, there's the video. In the comments, let me know what your thoughts are on Princess Zeisan, an urgent request here, and also what I discussed there at the end. Do you think Zeisan will get actual story content going forward? Will it be in the novels or somewhere else? And what way do you want her story to play out? Given that it seems like it sort of has to play out in something resembling a way where everything goes wrong for her, Sozin wins, and it's a tragic tale for, Princess Zeisan. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.